And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening. Welcome to the program. Well, so much going on in the United States at the moment. You know, just sort of watching the headlines flash by. The Supreme Court in the US upholding the ban on TikTok. Donald Trump having a conversation tonight with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Says afterwards on his own social network, Trump says essentially, it was a good conversation. We're going to solve many problems together that might well calm markets, and particularly when you consider all of the rhetoric for his domestic audience that Trump has been using around tariffs on China. And all of that is going to have a big impact on what you pay for goods, going to have a big impact on inflation all round. The big story here, of course, is what broke as we were coming to the end of the show last night around Ithala SOC. Often markets itself or is described in some way as a bank. Technically it isn't, but the Prudential Authority of the Reserve Bank saying it's technically insolvent, and Ithala today saying it will go to court to try and stop itself from being placed in provisional liquidation. I have a horrible feeling that this is going to get intensely political, and I think political on all sides in KwaZulu-Natal. MK's released a statement calling the Reserve Bank a silent assassin. The IFP Premier, Tami Ntuli, he seems keen on defending Ithala. Other members of that provincial administration, I think, will too. And in a way, what nobody needs is a big, long court case about this. Thankfully, the National Treasury has confirmed that if you've got the money deposited at Ithala, the money will be safe. They'll guarantee it, essentially. There was a curious little note in one of the statements, a critique perhaps of Ithala, that was sort of managed in a way that made it very expensive. And I wondered if someone somewhere was sort of pointing to what might come out in court. But if a bank is provisionally insolvent, if a bank is technically insolvent rather, what possible action can the Reserve Bank take? It has to do what it has done. Can you imagine the alternative? It collapses, and then what? Sort of VBS, but a little bit bigger all over again. And there's a long part of our history here. I was hearing from people today who tell me their families, their parents bought their first house with a bond through Ithala. So there's a lot to look at with this issue. I think it is going to get quite messy. And then more on ArcelorMittal, a statement this evening from the Minister of Labour and Employment, Nkosazana Meth, saying that she's going to try and do everything she can to help ArcelorMittal. She spoke to the CEO today. Okay, I mean, I accept that. I accept that she wants to do that. Just as you heard last night, I don't know what the options are. This is in some ways an industrial policy question, but in many other ways, just about a lack of demand for steel. You can't make people want steel. I mean, you can't say everyone must buy steel. It's just not how it works, not how an economy works. So I don't know what the options are for government. I think that's going to be very difficult. There are some calculations suggesting that 100,000 jobs could go as a result of ArcelorMittal's decision once you sort of factored everything in. That does seem a little high to me, I must just say. I'd like to see the calculations before I make any further comment. Let me just say that. And then a strong day for Sasol. Partly, I think, because of stronger oil prices, partly because of an interview that the CEO gave to Bloomberg, but their shares up nearly 9% on the day. They lost 55% of their value in the last 12 months. Some of that commentary at the beginning of the year suggesting that for Sasol, the only way is up. Maybe very much on the money. Talking of which, good to hear from you this evening. We'll have the Friday Biz Blitz. You could book your spot now if you like. You phone us on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, confirmation today from the Communications Minister, the DA Solly Malatsi, that he wants to change the funding model of the SABC. He wants it to fund itself, well, don't we all? The bigger process, of course, is getting the new SABC bill through Parliament. He's looking at a way of funding it while that happens. He's withdrawn the previous bill. As you know, and as I can confirm personally to you, the SABC is in an impossible financial position. Hasn't been able to make a profit for some time. Some of its television audiences are declining quite quickly because of more competition, and it still has a very important public service mandate to provide news and educational programming. To put it another way, even though I now work for a competitor of the SABC, as a nation, we need the SABC. William Bird's a director at Media Monitoring Africa. William, good evening. So the minister wants a new way to fund the SABC. Very few people pay their TV licenses. I mean, what options are there?
Good evening. Well, we need to find some. As you point out, we need a public broadcaster of some shape, size, or variety. This is an issue that should have been addressed about a decade and a half, if not 2 decades ago. But be that as it may, at least it's now being addressed finally. And the options are decreasing. The simple reality is that what our news does and journalism fulfills an essential public good. Much like roads and healthcare and transport and that kind of thing, water and sanitation, journalism is the new version of that. The reality then comes down to say, well, how do you fund that? And a lot of that must come from public funding. So his options are going to include probably some kind of a mixed public commercial model. Obviously, one of the biggest reasons why the SABC is facing the kind of financial crisis is A, because the previous ministers decided to switch off analog before SABC had any alternative, cutting off a lot of their audiences, and then the shift to digital. And then, of course, what that means for raising money. So they're now looking at some kind of a public interest content levy, which would be some kind of a levy that would be levied on devices. They've considered the option of asking other entities to help collect that money for them, because, of course, one of the big issues with the TV license has been collection. So there are a number of things, but they need to actually put out some models, get public debate going on those, and then let's see if we can find something that might actually work.
I mean, some kind of levy, that would probably mean on every cell phone, everything that can broadcast anything that is streamed, because the SABC does stream its own products as well. There will be a levy on that. I don't know if that's really workable. I think there will be huge opposition. The cell phone companies would say, why should our prices go up?
Well, they may well say that, but the reality is if we need and if we want to have information that is accurate and credible, we need to fund journalism. It's as simple as that. And a big part of that, to that ecosystem, is a public service broadcaster. That's that's a global issue that people are facing. So the money's going to have to come from somewhere, and quite what that looks like, I'm not sure. But you can do it in a way that can raise a lot of money in a reasonable method. Of course, we've squandered opportunities. When they sold off the spectrum, when they had that spectrum auction, that money, went to CASA. Everyone was all excited and happy about how much money they got. But of course, it just went straight back into the fiscus, when in fact that money should have gone to a dedicated public interest content fund. That would have gone a long way to already starting to say, well, how do you start to sustain these things? So you've got to look at, being clever with how we do these things. And when you sell off public assets, you shouldn't actually just let them disappear into the fiscus. They should be going to things that are going to actually fund journalism and fund programming that isn't going to be made by anyone else. Because people are going to say, oh, well, there's Netflix and there's all these other providers and these private things. Yes, there are, but they don't provide, and nor should they be providing content for people that need it, like children. Children's programming doesn't make money, nor should it. But it is essential if you're going to talk about a developed nation.
There are all sorts of conversations around what should happen. A household levy is another suggestion. Would it not just be easier for government to give the SABC money every year from tax revenue, for that to be included in the tax predictions, to be included in the budget, but for it to be ring-fenced in some way? And I'm sure there would be a way you could do that, or to have some body that could decide how much it gets. Wouldn't that be easier than anything else?
Yeah, that may well be a very good option. I think that the hesitancy about that is how you get that kind of thing through. Doing anything through Treasury and introducing those kinds of new systems, you're looking at a timeline of 5 to 7 years. The SABC doesn't have that kind of longevity left, so you've got to find some mechanism that is going to work for the SABC. The curious thing is that this is more really a question of political will than it is really a question of finding the money. Because when you look at our other public entities, the SAA, Denel, and all of these other entities that have lost a huge amount of money, they were happy to farm, give them literally billions and billions of rands. SABC, the last few times they've got money from the public fiscus, it's been on the basis of guaranteed loans that they've always had to pay back. They haven't received that kind of a bailout that so many of these others have. And again, if you'd resource this thing properly, if you'd put the money into maintenance over the last 2 decades instead of just, thinking it's going to fix itself, or you keep it in crisis, which was part of the state capture project, would be in a very different scenario. So now we are, again, looking down the barrel, but we say we need a public broadcaster. It's about what that looks like in a digital environment and how we're going to fund that. And certainly, we can ring-fence money for that, but they need to come up with a viable plan.
How urgent is it, William? I mean, if we don't do something, TV audiences decline, problems at Radio Park, etc. Could it all just collapse in some way? William Bird, we seem to have lost you there. All right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Sorry, I was just saying, how urgent is the need? I mean, what happens if we do nothing?
If we do nothing, the SABC collapses. If that happens, you lose a massive part of our ability to function as a democracy. Bear in mind that it's still got the biggest audiences in the country, and people rely on it in order to access information, especially for African language content. So this isn't something that we want to just get rid of, and we know from global experience, where you get rid of a public broadcaster, it has a materially negative impact on all other media, not just in terms of your broader societal impact.
William Bird, thank you, Director at Media Monitoring Africa.
7:02. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Looks like there might now be a court battle, which I would suspect could become quite bitter, between Ithala and the Prudential Authority of the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank saying last night it was placing Ithala into provisional liquidation. Technically, Ithala is not a bank. It was allowed to take deposits under an exemption that's now expired. The Prudential Authority says it's technically insolvent. The National Treasury has confirmed it will guarantee all of the money deposited in the bank. Today, Ithala said it would challenge this decision by the Reserve Bank in court. The KwaZulu-Natal Premier Tami Ntuli says he supports the bank. He wants it to continue. Kabelo Khumalo is the company and markets editor at Business Day. Kabelo, good evening. I mean, I presume that the Prudential Authority is on strong ground here. If Ithala is technically insolvent, it has to act.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen, and good evening to the listeners at home. Yeah, I mean, it has been an ongoing saga or fight between the Prudential Authority and Ithala really over the past 3 years or so. Because like you said in your introduction, Ithala is not a bank, but it has been operating under this exemption that is renewed yearly by the Prudential Authority, which it did not renew in December of 2023, which then essentially rendered Ithala's activities really in conflict with the law. That's so an appointment of what they call a repayments administrator, who essentially took over the affairs of Ithala in terms of their deposit-taking activities. And one was not surprised when yesterday the Prudential Authority applied for this provisional liquidation, because just about 5 months ago, the Financial Services Conduct Authority also suspended Ithala's license, saying its solvency is non-existent, really. So to answer your question, one will think that the Prudential Authority will not just go to court if they are not on solid ground on this matter.
There's quite a lot of politics here. I mean, one or two of the statements released by people quite personal. It would seem some politicians in KZN and from more than one party, they're going to fight this quite strongly. I mean, this could get quite bitter.
Yeah, that seems to be the way. I mean, the provincial government has been to court trying to compel previously the Prudential Authority to renew the exemption, and they lost there. So that shows you that an indication that politicians naturally don't always take decisions based on the facts before it. I saw that a lot of even the legislature has come in defense of Ithala, but nobody is saying with confidence that they've seen the books of Ithala and that it is solvent and that depositors' money are safe. That is the worrying part if we think of what happened at VBS, that people are just defending Ithala without confidently saying we have seen their books and we believe that the bank, in quotation marks, is solvent.
Why such a strong defense? I understand if you're a provincial government, you don't want to lose control of any entity. I understand, too, the long history here. I've made the point that people were telling me today about how their parents, financed the home through Ithala. So I understand all of that. Are there other factors at play? I mean, is there some kind of other benefit to having the bank and keeping it?
I think that the bigger benefit, really, in my own summation, is that, there's been talk over many years now of establishing a state-owned bank. And Ithala, has been operating for many years and trying to be that state-owned bank, a fully fledged bank. And, that defeats that debate that has been held by those who are pushing for the idea of a state-owned bank if you let Ithala be liquidated. So I think that's the bigger fight. People want, Ithala to be seen to be, working, and so that, you can make a case for a state-owned bank, which other people are hostile to.
There are other aspects to all of this, but it would seem to me the most likely outcome is, okay, everybody goes to court. If the Prudential Authority is right and it's technically insolvent, I would presume on the acts, and I'm no expert on the law of this, a judge would have to rule the Prudential Authority did the right thing. There might be an appeal, but in the end, this is probably the beginning of the end for Ithala, from what I know at the moment.
It seems so. Like I said, the Prudential Authority is a regulator, and the impression that will be created by those who support Ithala is that they've got an extra grind with Ithala. I don't know why, when they regulate so many companies in the financial services sector. My own belief is that they have sufficient cost to launch this action. Otherwise, that will be the most strange litigation by a state-owned entity, by a state-owned, department to go after a company for willy-nilly reasons. So I would suspect that this might be the end of Ithala as we know it.
Kabelo Khumalo, thank you very much indeed. Companies and Markets Editor at Business Day.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Tato Mashego is Portfolio Manager at Sanlam Private Wealth. Tato, good evening. Astonishing for Sasol, up 9.5% on the day. Their share price has lost a huge amount of value over the last year, but finally some positive news.
Well, good evening, Stephen. Yes, it has indeed been a very positive start to the year for Sasol, and one might add for oil in general as an extension. And one hopes that this can continue for some time. We know that Sasol had quite a tepid 2024, if we could call it that, with a number of challenges from chemicals pricing being very muted to operational issues at Secunda and them not getting enough volumes through. And then, of course, issues around the oil price. But we've seen a start to the year, perhaps somewhat initiated by the sanctions on the Russian oil tankers, as well as the weakening rand. Both of those being positive for Sasol, and we've seen a very strong response from the market as a result.
Obviously, it has 75 billion rands worth of debt. I mean, there's a long way to go.
Yes, there definitely is. A lot of questions can be asked around capital allocation when it comes to Sasol over the past decade or so, with specific reference to the Lake Charles facility, and that debt will take time to pay off. They are generating free cash, that does obviously help, but they almost need somewhat of a prayer for chemicals prices to recover, which would help them pay down the debt a lot faster, one would imagine.
You mentioned that oil is up, gold is up too. Interesting to see. I mean, oil can be up for a variety of reasons. People may also be watching the Middle East very closely. Gold up, I wonder if that's got anything to do with an inauguration next week, but that is what everyone's going to be watching.
A golden inauguration, shall we call it. Yes, I think oil prices, gold is probably pricing in some uncertainty when it comes to President Trump's intended policies, whether it be tariffs or other geopolitical moves. And so I think some of that premium is being baked in. Another potential reason could be the markets saying we may see a few more rate cuts this year. given what happened with the latest CPI print and the core coming in slightly lower than expected. And so for non-yielding assets like gold, lower interest rates as well as heightened uncertainty is nothing but good news.
And then the Chinese GDP figures. I mean, the other sort of big factor in the economy at the moment is the Chinese, in the global economy, is the Chinese economy. Their economy, 5% was their GDP figure, matching the government's targets, curiously.
Well, yes, I would actually say it's not very curious. I think they have many tools at their disposal to hit that target. So when the Chinese government says they want 5% GDP growth, and you're coming into the last quarter of 2024, it's a simple calculation to figure out that you need 5.4% in this quarter to get to the 5%. And so they unlock the taps when it comes to infrastructure spend, as well as putting through some monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus, and there you get your 5.4%, and thus 5% overall for the year. So not many governments are able to do that, but I think the Chinese are. But I mean, if we look just underlying the GDP, obviously continued strength in export and industrial production. They're sitting on $1 trillion surplus when it comes to trade, and obviously Mr. Trump is not too happy about that. But the consumption side, I think we still need to see a recovery in consumer demand in China. Obviously, they're experiencing a bit of deflation and some weak sentiment from the consumer side of things.
Obviously, everyone's in a bit of a state of, I suppose, flux is the best word to use ahead of Trump's inauguration. It's not so much what he says, it's what he does, and we'll be awaiting executive orders come Monday evening our time.
Well, we will indeed, and I think Mr. Trump does revel in playing the madman, as he calls it, or as Richard Nixon once called it. The fact that no one knows exactly what he's going to do seems to be exactly how he wants to play strategically. And so we all wait with bated breath to see exactly what will transpire. What he did mention today is that he had a phone call with President Xi Jinping, and they discussed, amongst other things, TikTok, fentanyl, as well as trade. And according to President Trump, the talks went very well. So perhaps we will have some positive surprises. Who knows?
Tato Moshiko, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio Manager at Sanlam Private Wealth. Bringing the time to 6:30.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
19 minutes now to 7 the time. Don't forget, of course, the Friday Biz Blitz in a few moments. You can phone now, 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. One of the most fascinating questions to ask people in business I've found is, how did you get there? I mean, how did you end up doing this? And some of the answers are fascinating. Someone told me it would be a good idea. A friend of a friend actually asked me to just fill in one Saturday afternoon, and actually I really enjoyed it and was still doing it on the Sunday. A family member said, "Oh, I've watched you grow up. Have you ever thought of doing this? This would be a good fit for you." Sometimes people do one thing and then end up doing something completely different. Dr. Brian Watson found himself doing postdoctoral research on energy technology in the US at Stanford University, no less. Then he decided to come home. Now he runs a thriving business that makes luxury body butter and soap. He's on the line. He's the founder of Ash and Mill. Brian, good evening. Quite a journey. So you came back to Cape Town. You were looking around for some R&D, research and development opportunities, looking around for, something to do. You seem to notice that those were few and far between. How did you end up in the soap and body butter business?
Hi, Stephen. Yes, it was more that I noticed that if I was interested in pursuing any of the avenues that I was truly interested in and that were more in line with my background, that would be really hard to come up with a proof of concept. I think once you're outside of a university context, you don't have access to the technical equipment that's really sophisticated and really expensive. And I started thinking about what businesses I could start that I could begin with a smaller amount of capital, and noticed that there was a gap in the market here for a premium homegrown soap and cosmetic company, and realized that I could start this with just basic kitchen equipment. And so And then on top of that, I noticed that there was a thriving market in Cape Town. And I was a fan of the lean methodology where you come up with the quickest possible way of testing an idea and bring that to market and see if you are correct, instead of investing, say, millions through a business plan and then it being a dud. And so I noticed the forensic market in Cape Town. I had the idea, and so I embarked on the journey.
Do you remember making your first batch of soap? Did you have any idea of what you were going to put in it? I mean, I wouldn't know where to start myself, but I don't have the education you do.
Yeah, no, I do remember the first ones. There were some terrible ones to begin with. And I actually did it in an apartment in Sea Point. I probably started in 2019, and I was still employed at the time. And it's quite interesting, actually, the chemistry of soap. Each oil that is available has a different distribution of fatty acids, and each fatty acid imparts a different property to the soap, be it how cleaning it is, how bubbly it is, how hard or soft the actual soap bar is, and what the properties of the lather are. And if you get the balance of oils incorrect in a soap bar, you will get the distribution of fatty acids skew, and you'll end up with a bar that will strip all the oil off of your skin or will become very soft very quickly. And so it's a delicate balance, and I really enjoyed digging into almost the science or the maths behind that, and I think we have a fantastic product now.
So, is there a large number of these oils? Are there sort of infinite combinations you could make?
Yeah, technically it could be infinite, but there are, I think, in our soap bars we use 5 different oils. I give you an example. If you were to make a soap bar just out of coconut oil, it has a really high lauric acid content, and that creates a very bubbly cleansing bar. But it's not great. You would really itch and scratch after using that.
So I presume then, is there a little bit of trial and error? I'm always, whenever someone gives me something to cook and they say, the recipe says cook until done, I want to bang my head against a wall because I don't know what that means. But do you had to cook up a few recipes, cook up a few batches, see what it was like, wash your hands, and not just once, but I presume use a bar for a week and then make a decision?
Yeah, well, not too many. I did create a spreadsheet, and I used a slightly more guided or mathematical approach to it, and that worked out. So I was able to hone in on a good formulation quite quickly, and we got that, and are really happy with where it stands.
I have this image of you in a flattened Sea Point on a big stove, kind of stirring something. Does it require heat to make it?
No, actually the opposite. So, there's 2 kinds of soap. There's cold process soap and there's hot process soap. And in cold process soap, you use a lye or a very basic solution, and you add that to your oil mixture. And what you're doing there is you're hydrolyzing the fatty acid ester bonds between glycerol and the fatty acid. And that reaction is exothermic. And so the mixture will heat up as you blend it. And then if you let it get too hot, it's problematic because then the glycerol that you're liberating in the reaction leaches out separates from the soap. And soap, in a molecular sense, is just a fatty acid ester, which is negatively charged, or fatty acid, which is negatively charged, and then a counter ion. In the case of bar soap, it's sodium, and in liquid soap, it's potassium. And so we want to keep the temperature down when we make our soap to retain the glycerol or the glycerin. And that glycerin is a natural humectant, which is moisturizing to your skin. And so we've opted for a more laborious and slightly more time-consuming methodology. If you have a hard store-bought soap that's actually been heated up, and the glycerin has leached out, and they've separated the fatty acid salts from the glycerin.
I've been using soap, I presume, my entire life, and I've never discussed
That's encouraging.
Thank you. I've never discussed the science of it in quite this way, or heard someone discussing the science of it in quite this way. When you have the batch and the process kind of right, I mean, does it come out the same every time?
No, there is some variability because it's down to feel. So, in summer in Cape Town, it's quite warm, and so the batch will react differently while we're making it. We also are still doing things with hand mixers as opposed to a large industrial scale. It's quite hard to scale the cold process method, and then the temperature in the room while the soap is curing also has an impact. So there is batch to batch variation, but we understand the variables at play and we try to control them.
Are some batches better than others? I mean, is there a bit more demand for Ashen Mill made in summer as opposed to the winter batch?
No, nobody knows the difference. No, now we keep everything quite regular.
There's a magical quality of soap in that it kills germs. Now, obviously, it has to do that, and that's about getting the combination of things right. So the basis of it has to be correct, but your product has to stand out from everyone else's because, I think you're probably aware of this, Brian. There are quite a lot of soap brands on the market. Yours has to stand out somehow.
Yes. Yeah, so I think ours does stand out. It's a premium product. And when people are buying a product, they're not just buying the product, they're also buying a feeling, and they're buying into the story behind the product. And so we focus on all of those together. Where our product performs really well is because of the formulation, which I described earlier on. We really wanted to create a bar of soap that was moisturizing, but still gave you that feeling of it being cleansing. And so you can create a very moisturizing bar, but it won't lather up. And the lather will be thick and creamy as opposed to light and fluffy. And so we recognize there's a lot of psychology at play. And then also you want a bar that will last long. You can get a soap made purely of olive oil, and it won't last very long. It'll turn soft quite quickly. And then as far as the ingredients go, we also try to use local ingredients. We've incorporated rooibos into our soaps as exfoliating particles. We have apricot kernel as exfoliating particles, upcycled coffee grounds, and in all of those, getting the particle size to be the correct, size was important. Otherwise, they would be very scratchy or far too abrasive. And then, we put a focus on the kinds of essential oils we use, and they're not cheap. But we've tried to where possible source them locally. Unfortunately, there are a good number of citrus oils, rose geranium, and others that can be sourced locally. And
the soap that you're making for your market, I presume primarily in Cape Town, but I'm sure available nationwide. Would you change it if you were trying to sell it in the US, another market you might know a little bit? Is the market for soap the same everywhere, I suppose is what I'm asking?
I think the people at Unilever would probably tell you it's not, but there's probably different demographics that will use a bar soap. Other people would be accustomed to using liquid soap or body washes. Body washes are not technically soap. And so there will be variation from market to market, but there will always be within a market a demographic that wants a premium product, that they want it for the experience and the scent. And that's the market we're, for now, seeking to service. And we're seeking to do it in a way that it is proudly South African, to use that saying, and does showcase our ingredients. It also, it's something where we wanted to create soap as more of a lifestyle product, where it's not just soap that you clean yourself with, but in Cape Town you'll wake up early and you'll go to Clifton and you'll watch the sunrise maybe and swim in the ocean and have coffee on the beach, and then you'll come home and have a shower. And it's that product that punctuates your lifestyle. And after a hard day's work and you've gone trail running around Lion's Head, you come home and you have a shower before going out to dinner. And I think there are so many tourists that are coming to South Africa and are falling in love with South Africa, falling in love with Cape Town and the lifestyle of Cape Town. And what Ashmore is often is a way for them to take a bit of Cape Town home with them and to remind them of that experience and that lifestyle that we get to enjoy here.
I presume also you kind of maybe want to get yourself into some of the hotels.
Absolutely, and I think we have some very unique opportunities here, not just hotels, but also our game reserves. And so if you're in South Africa and you're having a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and you've just come in from a game drive and you need to take a shower and, moisturize with some body butter afterwards, and then you head out to dinner and enjoy our incredible cuisine and world-leading wines, then that's where Ashmore would fit into that experience.
Dr. Brian Watson, thank you. Really good to talk to you. Lovely to talk about the science of soap. Thank you. Brian Watson is the founder of Ash and Mill Soap Bar, and you've heard, of course, how he puts it together.
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011-883-0702.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. First question on the Friday Biz Blitz this Friday evening. The World Economic Forum is held annually in which village in Europe? It is a very easy question. We've got questions also about the Prudential Authority and what they've been doing, and about someone who also took an oath in Southern Africa this week. But first question, the World Economic Forum. It's held annually in which village in Europe? You know, of course, the number to dial. It's 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567. Questions too about Donald Trump's inauguration. That's going to be the big story next week. Going to be looking forward to seeing what he actually does and how all of that plays out. But of course, the first question today, the World Economic Forum. It's held annually in which village in Europe? Let's see if we're able to get an answer before the news in just a couple of moments. And of course, the number to dial. Let's go to Mohammed in Lenasia. Mohammed, hi. Where is the WEF held every year?
In Davos, in Switzerland.
World's easiest question, wasn't it, Mohammed? Yes, of course you're right.
Yes.
Okay, the Prudential Authority of the Reserve Bank has applied to liquidate which development finance corporation and financial services provider in KwaZulu-Natal?
I'm not too sure. Sorry.
It's the big story that everyone's been talking about over the last 24 hours?
I'm not too familiar with that. Sorry.
All right. Thanks, Mohammed. Sorry about that. Mohammed on the line from Lenasia. Second question on the Friday Biz Blitz. The Prudential Authorities applied to liquidate which development finance corporation and financial services provider in KwaZulu-Natal? That is our second question today. And we've got questions also about a country that neighbors us in a moment as well. So, our second question, the Reserve Bank's Prudential Authority applying to liquidate which development finance corporation and financial services provider in KwaZulu-Natal? And some of the KZN politicians are not particularly pleased with it. And they are very, very angry at this decision. So, yeah, good to hear from you on that. And, of course, other questions as well around the inauguration of Donald Trump coming through too. And I think that's going to be one of the big issues that we'll be looking at next week through the signing of executive orders when, of course, they start to come through after he takes the oath, which will be on Monday. I see, in fact, that inauguration may have to be inside because it's going to be so cold in the US. Second question on the quiz tonight. The Prudential Authority applying to liquidate which development finance corporation and financial services provider in KwaZulu-Natal? And, of course, that is our second question this evening. And unfortunately, we are going to have to leave it there tonight. It's been lots to come in the next hour or so. You're with The Money Show. Good evening. It's 7 o'clock.